What is tragedy? In this video, we will be looking at Sophocles' play Oedipus the King. Unlike Aeschylus, who wrote a trilogy on the story of the house of Agamemnon, the Oresteia, Sophocles did not write a trilogy on the story of Oedipus. What he did produce was 3 independent plays: Oedipus the King, Oedipus at Colonus, and Antigone. That is the order in which the legend itself unfolds, but it is almost certainly not the order in which the plays were written, and it seems that they were never performed together in Athens as a trilogy. The story of Oedipus is very well known today, and it was very well known in ancient Greece. But Greek myths were not stable. They were malleable and took different forms according to the interests of the vase painter or the sculptor or the poet or the playwright who was handling that particular story. There was a certain degree of license and freedom for invention. For example, in some versions of the myth of Oedipus, Oedipus hangs himself when he discovers his true identity. That does not happen in Sophocles' play, but the audience for that original performance must have been wondering quite how the familiar story would be handled this time round. And Sophocles presents the story to us through a series of inquiries and disclosures, recognitions and reversals, which not only lead us into the story of extraordinary pain and suffering, but into some very perplexing philosophical questions. When Oedipus arrives at Thebes, he finds the city persecuted by the Sphinx, and he destroys the Sphinx by solving its riddle. The riddle, of course, is this: what is it that goes on 4 legs in the morning, 2 legs at midday, and 3 legs in the evening? The answer being man, crawling as a child, standing upright as a man, and in old age leaning on a stick. Oedipus at the beginning of the play is strong, self-confident, the upright man in the midday of his life. But in the hinterland to the play, there will be the image of the child, and at the end of the play we see Oedipus reduced to a condition similar to that of old age, needing to be led because he is blind. There is a kind of riddle of the Sphinx which attaches itself to Oedipus himself, and the riddle of Oedipus is encapsulated in a way in his own name. There's a pun here because the name Oedipus combines various elements of Greek: oida, meaning I know, pous, meaning foot, and oideo, meaning to swell. So he is the one who knows, and he is the one with the swollen foot, swollen because his feet were pinned together when he was exposed on Mount Kithaeron. And one wonders whether this pun is significant. Is it a way of disclosing his true nature, or perhaps disclosing his future? Is Oedipus's fate already present, encoded in his own name? In his Poetics, Aristotle identified recognition and reversal as two of the principal characteristics of a well-crafted tragedy. And it's not surprising that he singles out Sophocles' Oedipus the King as an example of what he thinks is a really effective and successful tragic drama, because recognition and reversal are crucial to the way in which Sophocles has structured his play. There is, for example, an obvious reversal in the status of Oedipus, who begins the play as the self-confident ruler and ends it as the ruined, blinded exile. As Tiresias the prophet warns early in the play, he is thought to be a stranger who has migrated here, but later he shall be revealed to be a native Theban. He shall travel blind instead of seeing, poor instead of rich. A prophecy that, of course, is fulfilled through the reversal of the status of Oedipus, a reversal that is brought about by a series of recognitions. Whereas in some tragedies there is a single overwhelming recognition towards the end of the play, for example, when Shakespeare's Othello is brought to recognize that he has been deceived by Iago. Here, instead, we have a series of gradual and partial recognitions which increase the tension of the drama as we are given piece by piece a picture of what the story was behind the arrival of Oedipus at Thebes. And it takes a while for Oedipus to put together the whole picture. The messenger who arrives from Corinth, the shepherd who is brought back from Mount Kithaeron, and Queen Jocasta herself all recognize the truth before Oedipus does. It's as if Oedipus is almost warding off that ultimate recognition. And when he does recognize the story, his true identity, his response is not to hang himself, but to blind himself. And that self-blinding is carried out, partly it seems, in order to prevent him from seeing, recognizing his parents in the underworld. He could not bear to look upon them. This self-blinding is the making literal of the metaphor which has been running through the play. For Sophocles' play is structured partly around these binary opposites of blindness and insight. It is the physically blind prophet Tiresias who has insight into the truth. It is the sighted Oedipus who is blind to the truth. Before the play opens, we know that Oedipus has solved the riddle of the Sphinx. He knew enough to do that, but what he doesn't know, of course, is the riddle of his own identity. And Oedipus derides Tiresias for his physical blindness, at the same time as rejecting the insight that Tiresias provides. Tiresias says that Oedipus does not know who he is. Now he has sight, that is literal sight, but shortly he will look on darkness. And this oscillation between blindness and insight, this reversal of the two terms, is part of the way in which recognition unfolds in the course of the play. These various aspects of the play that we have been thinking about so far can all be collected under the single title Irony, because tragic irony is perhaps nowhere more obvious than in this particular play. And we can think about irony in two ways. First of all, the irony that is generated by the distance between the knowledge that is possessed by the audience and the knowledge that is possessed by the characters. And particularly in this case, where the Athenian audience will be well versed in the myth of Oedipus, we as an audience know in advance of the characters' discoveries what it is that is going to happen, or rather what it is that has already happened in the backstory of the play. And it's that disparity between the audience's knowledge and the character's knowledge, that irony created by that distance between the two forms of understanding, that is part of the tension that the play generates as the story is uncovered piece by piece. And secondly, there is the irony of unintended consequences, the way in which the actions of Oedipus are intended to save the city from pollution, but they result in the revelation that he himself is the presence that is polluting the city. He sets out to find the man responsible for the plague, only to discover that the man whom he is pursuing is himself. There are more local ironies on the way through the play. Jocasta insists on the falsehood of prophecy. She says, "Do not believe oracles and prophecies. There was one that we had in our family, but it has turned out to be untrue." Of course, the prophecy that Laius would be killed by his own son has indeed been fulfilled. And a further irony here is that it is actually Jocasta's insistence on the falsehood of this particular prophecy that first stirs Oedipus's recognition that the prophecy is true. It's that little detail about the killing of Laius that begins to trigger in his memory this possibility. Another irony is that the messenger from Corinth thinks that he is bringing reassurance to Oedipus when he tells him not to worry because Polybus and Merope in Corinth were not his real parents. It's that disclosure that is a crucial step in the unfolding of the terrible story. And there are ironies too in Oedipus's own words. "Sick as you are, none is as sick as I," he says at the beginning of the play, meaning that he shares the sickness of the city insofar as he is its king. He shares the suffering of the people, but of course those words point to the fact that he is indeed sick in the sense of being the pollution at the heart of the troubled city. "I do this for my own sake," he says. "I am pursuing this quest as if Laius had been my own father." Of course, Laius was his own father, and he pronounces a curse on the guilty man, not knowing that in so doing he is cursing himself. These are just some of the ironies of the play, ironies that Sophocles has embedded deep in the play's structure. The play then is built around the terrible riddle of Oedipus's identity. Tiresias says, "He shall be revealed as being to his children whom he lives with, both a brother and a father, and to his mother both a son and a husband, and to his father a sharer in his wife and a killer." So here the most fundamental relationships within a family are being disturbed, perverted, and indeed multiplied. And it seems to be the case that for Oedipus there are too many parents, too many homes. His parents at the biological level are Laius and Jocasta, but it was Polybus and Merope in Corinth who brought him up. He has two sets of parents. But in a way, the two shepherds are parents for him. Tiresias tells him, "This day will be your parent and destroyer," because it is this day that will give him a new identity. And Oedipus himself calls himself a child of the event that brought good fortune. He seems therefore to be a child of several different sets of parents. And Oedipus also seems to have too many homes. Thebes, where he now is, where he has made his home, but where he was originally born anyway. It is in a double sense Oedipus's home. Corinth was his home, where he was brought up. In a way, Mount Kithaeron was his home, where he was exposed on the mountainside. So what we have here is a deeply troubling disturbance of the fundamental structures of the family and of individual identity. The very building blocks of social identity and individual identity seem to be really hard to use now, almost destroyed beyond use. This uncanny multiplication disturbs the integrity, the wholeness, the identity of Oedipus. And this is part of a question that lies at the heart of the play, to do with free will. It does seem to be characteristic of tragedy in several different cultures and periods that the question of agency, of autonomy, of free will is at the heart of the genre. Does Oedipus have free will? Does the oracle's prophecy mean that his fate is predetermined? Is it the case that whatever he does, whatever steps he takes, he will be brought ultimately to the same point? That's one way of framing the question. Another way is to think about whether the acts that Oedipus performs are acts of Oedipus himself alone. Because Oedipus says this happened through the action of a cruel deity. The messenger says that some god showed him the way. The chorus asks, "What madness has come upon you? Who is the god who has led you to this?" So Oedipus and the messenger and the chorus see some divine, some supernatural agency at work in what has happened. But at the same time, the messenger speaks also of horrors willed and not unwilled, reminding us that it is individual human agency that has brought about these horrors. And so we have here what seems to be a doubleness in thinking about agency. It seems that these extraordinary, exceptional actions can only be understood, according to Greek thinking, if they are conceived of as being not brought about solely by human agency, but brought about also at the same time by divine intervention. This sense that a really extraordinary act can only have been brought about by a combination of human will and divine agency is exemplified in the exchange between the chorus and Oedipus towards the end of the play. The chorus asks Oedipus how he brought himself to do such a terrible thing, and they're referring there to the self-blinding. Doer of dreadful deeds, how did you bring yourself so to quench your sight? The emphasis there on doing, on human action. But then it says, which of the gods set you on? So it seems that they are asking a double question. They need two answers. How did you do it? And which of the gods was involved in bringing this about? And Oedipus replies to both those questions. It was Apollo who accomplished these cruel sufferings of mine, perhaps referring to the whole course of his life and not just to the blinding. But in respect to the blinding, he says, no other hand struck my eyes but my own miserable hand. The emphasis there on his own hand as the instrument of the blinding. And so both the chorus and Oedipus himself think that a double explanation is the only way of understanding what has happened. Both human agency and divine agency are at work here. We have touched briefly here on a number of very difficult philosophical problems. And underlying all of these is the problem of the relationship between humans and gods. And a version of that question that forces itself on any audience or reader of this play is the question of justice. Is what happens to Oedipus in any sense just? Are the gods punishing Oedipus for what he has done? That's a difficult question to answer, partly because the gods do not themselves appear in the play, as they do, for example, in the Oresteia. It's difficult also because at several points it seems that Oedipus is acting justly, responsibly, piously. After all, when he was told by that man who got drunk at the dinner in Corinth that Polybus and Medepe were not his parents, he set off to learn the truth by consulting the oracle. When the oracle delivered that terrifying prophecy, he turned his back on Corinth and went off in the opposite direction precisely to try to avoid those things happening. When he was presented with the spectacle of the city of Thebes being devastated by the plague, he again consulted the oracle because he needed to know how to save his people. It is difficult, therefore, to think that Oedipus is being punished for what he has himself done. But there might be another explanation. Perhaps he is being punished for what his father did, because in some versions of the story, Laius is said to have raped the boy Chrysippus. As a result, it was prophesied that his own son would kill him. We can see there a kind of retributive justice at work. But that's a problematic explanation, because Sophocles never mentions that particular aspect of the story of Laius. He could easily have slipped that into one of the speeches by the chorus, but he doesn't. He removes that. And in removing that part of the myth, he makes it harder to see the overarching story as one of justice. It seems then that what this play lays before us is a series of very hard questions, both about human responsibility and about the justice of the gods. And perhaps it is characteristic of tragedy as a genre that it gives us those questions, but makes it harder for us to deliver answers.